In 1973, in a small US country estate, President Richard Nixon was waiting for the arrival of a special guest. The General Secretary of the USSR, Leonid Brezhnev. A chic car stopped near the entrance. The car door opened, and from it appeared a delicate woman's leg. A pretty blonde got out of the car. Behind her appeared the figure of the Soviet leader. Nixon hurried towards them. He stretched out his hand and froze. Rather than responding with a broad smile, Brezhnev gave the president his mistress's hand. This had never happened before. Only Leonid Brezhnev would have dared to do that. He was a connoisseur of female beauty. He had over 50 lovers, nurses, singers, flight attendants, women of different profession and social status. Their only similarity was their appearance. All Brezhnev's mistresses were short, fair-haired and light-eyed. They looked quite ordinary. But it was his obsession with this look that would become his curse. Leonid Brezhnev could barely move, spoke with difficulty, breathed heavily, and complained of memory lapses. In people's memory, he remained a laughingstock. But few knew that Brezhnev had not always been like this. He was the youngest member of the Politburo. He was in good health, loved hunting and motor racing. He used to be happy and cheerful. But a personal tragedy had undermined his physical health. His unrequited love for a woman had driven him crazy. He became a drug addict and ruined his life. Novorossiysk, 1943. He was rushing through the thick smoke like a madman. The Germans suddenly attacked. The field was illuminated with bright flashes. Dead soldiers and blood everywhere. His ears rang to the sound of cannon fire. No one was left to operate the machine gun, so Leonid grabbed it. He started to frantically shoot at the enemy. There were not enough rounds. He knew this was the end. Help would not come. He suddenly heard a terrible whistling noise. The last thing he remembered was an unbearable pain piercing through his body. His hands were stained with blood. Leonid blacked out. Several days later, he came round. When he looked at himself in the mirror, he shuddered. His face was in bandages. He tried to talk, but the searing pain pierced his jaw. Later, Brezhnev was informed that during the battle, a grenade had exploded near him. A splinter hit him in the jaw. He underwent a serious operation, but doctors could give no guarantees of a full recovery. He had never felt so weak and helpless. The handsome Brezhnev could no longer recognize himself. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a monster. He furiously tried to rip off the bandages, but a hand stopped him. Leonid looked up. A blonde girl with kind eyes was looking at him. Brezhnev froze. What a beauty! The thought that she might pity him was unbearable. In desperation, he turned away. A month later, his bandages would be removed, and Leonid would not recognize himself. His mouth was distorted, and he had a swollen face. The former political instructor of the 18th Army had lost his good looks. The man in the mirror could not utter a word. His jawbone hadn't healed properly, so Leonid Brezhnev lost his power of speech. Despite the pain, he tried to read, but he could only make a wheezing noise. But for several weeks, Brezhnev exercised his jaw in an attempt to speak. But it was all in vain. He wanted to scream out in pain and frustration. Would he, a political instructor, remain handicapped forever? He wouldn't be able to communicate with his people. His career would surely be over. In desperation, Leonid threw a book at the wall. He was sobbing into his pillow when suddenly he heard a calm, soothing voice. Tamara was reading his book aloud carefully, articulating each word. No, she was not mocking him. Her voice trembled. She didn't want to offend this broken, devastated man. Leonid was ashamed. She remained at his side, comforting and caring for him. When Brezhnev had a fever, she wouldn't sleep. Leonid was enlightened. He was afraid to move. He listened to her, hoping that this moment would go on forever. For the next days, Tamara returned to his bedside. Thanks to her, Brezhnev learned to speak again and restore his diction. He could no longer imagine himself without this woman. She gave him back his hope and confidence. A long-forgotten feeling had been reawakened. Brezhnev had fallen madly in love. Tamara felt sure that they would get married. She didn't care if Brezhnev was 40 and she was only 20. Most importantly, they loved each other. But fate would decide otherwise. Tamara, a field hospital doctor, would be remembered not as the wife of the future General Secretary, but as his most painful mystery. High-ranking servicemen often had what was known as regimental wives. Tamara was just such a wife to Leonid Brezhnev. She'd been living with him for a very long time. However, she remained a mysterious legend. Leonid sneaked into the room. Tamara sat motionlessly on a chair. He silently approached and gently covered her eyes. However, Tamara did not move. Leonid understood that something had happened. He noticed a newspaper lying nearby. On the front page, there was a picture of Leonid Brezhnev in full colonel's uniform. And beneath it was an article about his heroic feat during which he had been severely wounded. The colonel and political instructor, Comrade Brezhnev, helped repel the German attack. After suffering heavy losses, the Germans retreated. The article mentioned Brezhnev's previous achievements, his military exploits, and his personal qualities. But in the newspaper, there was also a seemingly unimportant sentence: an exemplary party member and a great family man. But these words played a crucial role in the fate of the future General Secretary. Leonid lowered his eyes. He couldn't hide any longer. He hadn't told her that he already had a wife and 2 children. He didn't tell her because he was afraid that if Tamara knew about it, she would leave him, and he couldn't imagine his life without her. In desperation, Brezhnev threw himself at the feet of his lover, begging her for forgiveness and understanding. But Tamara didn't seem to hear. A fearful Leonid promised to leave his wife and children. When the war was over, they would be together as they had dreamed. But soon, Brezhnev would be discharged from the hospital and return to the front. From there, he would write letters both to his family, waiting in Moscow, and to his beloved woman, who would secretly pray to God that her loved one would be safe. This went on for 2 years, when the good news arrived. The Soviet troops had captured Berlin. The war was over, and he could finally go home. 1945, Moscow. He slowly walked up the stairs. He could already see the door of his apartment. Leonid knew that his children and Victoria were waiting for him. They had been married for 20 years. The love between them had long gone. But it was replaced with sincere friendship, along with 2 of the most beautiful children in the world. He pressed the doorbell. The door opened immediately. The apartment became full of cheerful hubbub. They hugged and kissed him. The children have changed so much. They have grown up. Leonid's heart sank. He was very fond of them, but he could not lie anymore. That same evening, Leonid and Victoria had a difficult conversation. He told his wife everything, about meeting Tamara, about their feelings for each other, which he had been hiding for 2 years. He was explaining everything and asking for forgiveness, but Brezhnev did not realize that his 16-year-old daughter Galina had been listening to him. Her father's words were very painful to listen to. How could he do this to them? Galina wanted to believe that her father loved her and her mother, but she couldn't. Leonid was afraid to look into his wife's eyes. His heart was breaking. He felt terrible guilt. Vika didn't cry or cause a scandal. If she had done, it would have been easier for Leonid. But his wife remained silent. It made it harder. Gradually, she came to her senses. She refused to stay and said she would file for divorce. He could go to the other woman, provided that Leonid remained in the house until morning, so he could explain everything to the children. Brezhnev had no choice. He agreed, not realizing the terrible consequences of his decision. His wife was a difficult woman. In appearance, she was very similar to Mao Zedong. If you compare these 2 portraits, I think you'll find a lot in common. He suffered constantly. Only the state security authorities were protecting him. They were trying to isolate Leonid Brezhnev from these troubles. That night, he didn't sleep. He was turning and moaning. He blamed himself for being such a coward. The guilt haunted him. His eyes were watering, but he couldn't sleep. He tried to convince himself that he needed to explain everything to his children. He simply had no choice. He couldn't lie to Tamara a second time. He walked around the apartment. The children were sleeping. Leonid entered his wife's room. The bed was made. Vika hadn't gone to bed. His wife was not there. Confused, Leonid went to see the one who would understand, the one who would calm and comfort him. He forcefully pulled the door handle. The apartment was unlocked. He rushed inside. Why was it so quiet? And where was Tamara? In the middle of the room sat a hunched female figure. She turned. Leonid froze. Vika looked at him calmly. She had found the apartment address on a receipt that was lying in Brezhnev's jacket pocket. While Leonid was at home, she went to visit the woman who was about to destroy her family. Looking into his wife's eyes, everything began to make sense. Tamara was gone for good. No, this cannot happen. What has Vika told her? A crazy thought ran through his head. Run after her, make her come back, no matter what. I must say, that was one of his most important qualities that manifested itself both in his personal life and in his politics. He was a stubborn man. His obstinacy was legendary. He could break through anything. Gas pedal to the floor, 120 kilometers per hour on the speedometer. He was driving like a madman. Sweat filled his eyes. He can see the station, but there is not much time. He must get Tamara back. For the first time in his life, he was running at full speed, elbowing his way through the crowds. He ran past irritated passers-by and noisy market sellers. He looked, but couldn't see her. He feared he may never see her again. In the distance, he saw a familiar figure. He felt the tears well as he rushed towards her. He grabbed her and held her close. He found her at last. He kissed her urgently on her cheeks, lips, shoulders. Fearful he might lose her again. He didn't care that the whole station was watching them. He had found her and would not lose her again. Tamara gently released herself from his embrace. He looked at her with horror. He would never let her go again. But Tamara quietly broke their embrace. Leonid was petrified. He looked at her helplessly. Leonid would never forget the sight of that petite female figure slowly disappearing into the crowd. He could not remember how he managed to drive back. He didn't know where he was or what he was doing. Suddenly, it was all about Tamara. He saw her every delicate profile, every blonde silhouette, every time he wanted to move forward, to cry out with joy. But it was all in vain. She was no longer in the crowd. He would not go after his Tamara again. But he would never be able to forget her either. In Leonid Brezhnev's broken heart, there arose an unusual hatred. He blamed his wife for taking away his precious Tamara. He would seldom appear at home and put all his energy into his work. He built a successful career and became a trusted associate of General Secretary Nikita Khrushchev. And when the time came, he would take his place and start a new era in Soviet history. Of course, in many respects, Brezhnev was politically naive compared with his predecessors Lenin, Stalin, and even Khrushchev. The era of Brezhnev is a peaceful, stagnant backwater. Perhaps people needed to sit and think. To contemplate the snow falling outside the window, not the ranks of prisoners, the tanks or the marching troops. It's not interesting to watch these things. In a sense, the Brezhnev era had been blessed. The position of General Secretary would bring him unlimited power and many privileges, such as a collection of unique weapons and 300 of the best vintage cars in the world. He had a huge fleet of vehicles, including Lincolns, Cadillacs, Rolls-Royces, Zills, and Mercedes. He loved them all, used to drive them himself. The guards were behind him naturally. Sometimes we had a flat tire. We would hurriedly change the wheel and try to catch up with him. But rarely could, because he drove so fast. As well as cars, he also collected gorgeous women. They all looked the same, slender, blonde, blue-eyed. Brezhnev would drown his pain in their embraces, seeing Tamara in each one of them. Translators, flight attendants, typists, and singers came and went. Brezhnev had no time to remember their names. He shocked the world with his amazing escapades. But nobody realized that the man with the sincere smile, who boasted about his amorous conquests, was in fact miserable. From the outside, everything seemed fine. A successful person, a prominent politician, a lady killer. There were many women on his list. A residence keeper in Zavidovo Anna, a maid from Zarechye Dacha Maria, a secretary Alla, the daughter of communist leader of Bulgaria, Lyudmila Zhivkova. The KGB regularly supplied the leader with pretty blonde lovers. Brezhnev didn't object. To him, it was like a game. For example, in Sochi, he met a singer, Anna Shalfiva, who worked in the local Philharmonic Society. With the help of his orderly or batman, he locked her up in a room. She was outraged by his boorish behavior. She managed to escape through an open window. Leonid Brezhnev tried to make up with her by giving her flowers and courting her. Gradually, he broke down her resistance. Brezhnev had another secret life carefully concealed by the General Secretary.
Це почалося з від'їзду Тамари. Він погано
It began after Tamara left. He didn't sleep well.
коли остаточно виснажував себе фізично на кілька годин,
He tossed and turned all night, then in the morning fell into a deep sleep for a few hours.
що з часом усе мене. Але генсек помиляв.
Brezhnev hoped his insomnia would pass,
Тим більше
but it got worse with age. His problems were being destroyed before his eyes. He couldn't forgive his wife for the grief he had suffered. Brezhnev and his wife were gradually drifting apart, but Victoria seemed resigned. She didn't blame him for his love affairs and silently put up with them. Her silence drove him mad. Brezhnev did not know what to think. Very soon, he would pay dearly for his wife's sufferings. The suburbs of Moscow, 1972. He heard a terrible din in the sitting room and ran out into the corridor. His daughter Galina could barely stand. Brezhnev couldn't hold back his anger. His assistants brought him a picture of Galina dancing the can-can on a table with naked legs and skirt pulled up. This was not the first time she had behaved this way. Galia was drinking. His son Yura was drinking. You understand? But it was all concealed. Victoria Petrovna had been suffering from this affliction. She knew all the details. Leonid Brezhnev did not know everything. He had two concerns. Firstly, his daughter's affairs, including Maris Lipa and Kio, an illusionist. His son was an alcoholic who would go to Red Square and proclaim that Brezhnev was a fool. He was arrested, but when they realized who he was released. It was not easy for Brezhnev to deal with. It was painful for Brezhnev to watch Galina. Another failed marriage, hard drinking. He wanted her to stay and talk, but drunken Galina laughed in his face. Brezhnev lost his temper and slapped her. She soon came to her senses. She gave her father a long, withering look and then left without saying a word. Brezhnev did not know that Galina's scandalous behavior was revenge for hurting her mother. Fights with his wife continued until Brezhnev broke up with Tamara. He couldn't forgive his wife for the grief he'd suffered. Brezhnev was gradually drifting apart from his family. But even then, Victoria seemed resigned. He didn't remember her blaming him for his amorous adventures. Galina hadn't forgotten about crying in her room all those years ago when she heard about her father's unfaithfulness. How she blamed herself for her parents fighting, and watching her father continuing to taunt her mother. Galina had become angry and now sought vengeance. For the first time in his life, Brezhnev slapped his child. She had grown up under these circumstances, but much of it was his fault. Brezhnev adored his Galina, indulged all of her whims, but his daughter became fretful and spoiled. Previously, he'd put up with her tricks. But now, because of the insomnia, despair tore at Brezhnev's heart. He had to do something. And Brezhnev had found a solution. He remembered the innocent pills to relieve stress recommended to him by his comrades from the Politburo. The General Secretary hated pills and never called for doctors. But he simply saw no other solution. Insomnia was ruining his life and driving him mad. Taking life-saving pills was the only solution. That night, he slept like a baby. There were no horrible visions. Panic and fear had vanished. In the morning, for the first time in several years, he woke up refreshed and rested, all thanks to the innocent pills. From then on, he would take them on a daily basis. The state of the General Secretary improved. Fatigue and nervousness disappeared. He felt full of strength and inspiration. Brezhnev couldn't imagine that soon he would become addicted to the pills. To intensify the sleeping pills' effect, he would take them with vodka. This heady mixture would be the beginning of the end. As well as soothing, the medicine noxiron, like diphenhydramine, also has a psychotropic effect. When taken in large doses, it turns into a drug, and when mixed with alcohol, it can be a killer. He became addicted to sleeping pills. In the beginning, he took one pill, but within a few months, he was taking 2 or 3. Someone said, "Leonid Ilyich, I take a pill with alcohol." He asked, "Does it help?" And one of the Politburo members answered, "Yes, it helps." And then, little by little, it got to the point that we were forced to dissolve vodka in water so that he wouldn't go too far. Moscow, 1972. The USSR was celebrating the 55th anniversary of the October Revolution. The atmosphere in the column hall of the House of the Unions was solemn. Recently, workers, peasants, soldiers, and party members were being awarded. Faces were radiant with smiles. Everyone was euphoric. A smiling Brezhnev was meeting the guests of honor. Next to the General Secretary sat his secretary, who was also his new passion. Faces were flashing. Brezhnev felt dizzy and terribly sleepy. Occupied by his own thoughts, he didn't notice himself shaking the hand of the next guest, a general. He was thanking Brezhnev for a medal, but Leonid didn't care. Then from behind the military man came a blonde woman. Not young, but beautiful, with a painfully familiar face. Brezhnev froze. He couldn't breathe. His heart was pounding. Surely it could not be her. Tamara left Moscow many years before. He thought he would never see her again. But there she is, so close. So close, and yet so distant. He didn't know what to say. Tamara looked at him with calm, confident eyes. She was no longer a naive little girl whose eyes shone with love and affection. Life had changed her. There in the north was born another Tamara, one who had forgotten how to feel. Her memories had been erased. Brezhnev didn't know that she had married a general and was living a quiet life. He was looking at her with a long, piercing gaze. Tamara gently took her hand away. The General Secretary felt unwell. He walked through the crowd, wanting only one thing: to escape. Brezhnev was driving his car through narrow country roads. He didn't care where. His hands were trembling. He wanted to get rid of this strange obsession. Brezhnev felt the car judder as it raced towards the ditch. At the last minute, he managed to drive off to the side. He breathed heavily, not understanding why he'd stopped, and then he began to cry like a baby. Weak and powerless, he had failed to take his own miserable life. The General Secretary instinctively felt for the pills in his pocket, but they were not there. His head was spinning, his hands were shaking. He felt a terrible throbbing pain. His head felt as though it would explode. When he came to his senses, Victoria was sobbing next to him. She told him that he had just suffered a severe stroke. She begged him not to kill himself, but Brezhnev didn't care about anything. It was a very strange moment in the life of Leonid Brezhnev. He was banned from smoking and drinking. He could no longer drive his car. He had slowed down. He asked, "Am I a Tsar or am I not a Tsar?" He had great power, but was cut off from everything. He decided to fight for his own freedom. The only thing that he still had. His freedom to take pills with vodka, knowing that such a combination was poisoning his body. One thing intensifies the other. He demanded sleeping pills with vodka for dinner and became addicted. He realized that the drug was much more effective taken this way. In just a few months, he had become very ill. In 1976, he survived a clinical death, then a heart attack. A year later, while on holiday, he would fall asleep while swimming. His guards only just managed to bring the General Secretary round. Now, the great and mighty USSR was governed by a weak, feeble old man who could barely move or talk, sometimes forgetting where he was and not seeing the line between reality and delusions. He was no longer interested in public affairs. Brezhnev shifted his routine and responsibilities. Here is what the foreign policy propaganda of the USSR, Valentin Falin, wrote. Our department was subordinated directly to Brezhnev, but endorsing the papers, the General Secretary didn't decide anything. The more papers he was slipped, the less he realized what was behind these papers. Thus, in 1979, peace-loving Brezhnev, who opposed army conflicts, signed an order to bring troops into Afghanistan. And when he realized what he'd done, he decided to resign. He stopped understanding anything. I remember this phrase stuck in my ears. I was watching one of the congresses, the 24th Party Congress, or maybe one of his speeches. He'd finished reading, looked at all those present in the hall like this, said in his Brezhnev style, rattled off, and left. With a heavy heart, his wife watched what her Leonid was turning into. She was extremely happy when he decided to retire. But these dreams wouldn't come true. Brezhnev couldn't resign. They had persuaded the sickly and feeble General Secretary that the country needed him. And Brezhnev believed them. Behind his back, a clique of party functionaries wanted this to last as long as possible, so there wouldn't be anyone to restore order. Then, of course, it turned into a farce. Everyone laughed. Now, the entire world was laughing at Brezhnev. The West, which had once so candidly met the Soviet leader, was openly mocking him. While visiting abroad, Brezhnev, as always, stood in the car and welcomed friendly people. But no one knew that a bodyguard was helping him to stand. Leonid Brezhnev couldn't keep his balance. He was taking more and more sleeping pills. He was literally begging doctors and security guards for pills. As a result, they began to hide drugs from him. Everyone was ordering his pills. I know that through Andropov, they ordered fake pills in Switzerland. He could easily call you in the middle of the night and say, "It's not working, I will take these." He had his own supply. Sometimes he would ask people from the Politburo. We often had to ask people he was close to, "Comrades, please do not give your medicines to Leonid Ilyich. You will kill him." Brezhnev jumped out of his bed. Outside the window, he saw a strange shadow. Something was quietly knocking on the glass. He covered his ears and tried to sleep. But without the usual pills, he could not fall asleep. Of course, his wife had some pills, but she'd hidden them. He decided to go and find them. Brezhnev crept into Victoria's bedroom and looked through her drawers, but the drugs weren't there. They were in a special locked place. Brezhnev could not resist. He woke up Vika and begged her to give him the pills. But his wife was adamant. So he picked the lock and with joyful eyes went back to his own bedroom. He poured several pills onto his palm. After a moment, he felt relief. His head began to swim, and then suddenly he seemed to awake from a nightmare. Brezhnev saw himself sitting on the floor as an old, hunched man. His body was trembling. No, this can't be him. What has happened during these few years? What has he become? It was disgusting and embarrassing, sick, lonely and useless. Like a madman, he was swaying and whispering something to himself. Suddenly, someone's tender arms embraced him. He raised his head. Victoria was looking at him with love and affection. Brezhnev could not resist. He hid his face in her shoulder and folded her in his arms, as if afraid that she would disappear. For the first time in many years, he was grateful to her for her support and affection. Victoria gently lifted him up. She put him to bed as if he was a child. She stroked his head. Brezhnev's eyes opened. She was always there for him. She tolerated his unfaithfulness, resentments. She looked after him when he was ill. He had many women. All his life he had been chasing a ghost. And yet all this time, near here was a woman who truly loved and needed him. He wanted to fall on his knees and ask for forgiveness, but he felt sleepy. For the first time in his life, Brezhnev did not want to fall asleep. But the effect of the pills was irreversible. A happy smile lit up his face. Brezhnev knew exactly what to do. He would give up taking the pills. He would get back his life and finally tell Victoria the truth. He will tell her that he was wrong, that he loves her, and she will surely forgive him. He fell asleep with a happy smile on his face. Nothing to fear or worry about now. Only warmth, peace at last. His body was found in the morning. Doctors stated that Brezhnev had died painlessly and quietly. His heart stopped while he was asleep. 1997. Moscow Oblast, Mental Hospital number 2. Two strong hospital attendants could barely drag a drunken woman in a dirty dress along the corridor. First, she resisted and refused to go, then rushed to embrace doctors and began to dance. It was here that she felt she was in the right place. She was so happy. There are so many people, and all their attention is focused on her. Take her away now! In her life, this scene was repeated many times. Only the entourage changed. First, expensive restaurants, then the kitchen of her own apartment, a dirty staircase, and finally, the alcoholics department of a mental hospital. It is here where the glamorous Soviet princess Galina Brezhnev spent her last days. She danced on a table, showing photographers her underwear. She got involved in drunken brawls at the Kremlin. She started affairs in front of millions of people and shocked foreign diplomats with her provocative clothes. For her entire life, this woman had been passionately fighting for her freedom. From her father, who dictated how she lived, and from the conventions required by her status as the Kremlin princess. She could have become a successful actress, a good mother, and a wonderful wife. But confrontation with her father ruined everything. Brezhneva ended her days in a mental hospital, alone and ill. It was the freedom for which she had fought so passionately. But when she obtained it, she lost everything. (1997) Moscow Oblast, Mental Hospital number 2. Galina was sneaking along the corridor. In her head, there was only one thought: to get out of here. She couldn't stay in the hospital any longer. She had been there for 3 years, kept under lock and key. Galina had been planning her escape all week, and finally, she was going to do it. All she had to do was go downstairs and along the corridor. She heard the footsteps of hospital attendants behind her. Her heart was bursting out of her chest. She can't give up just like that. She can already see the front door. Just a little further, and she will be free to begin a new life. It gave her the strength to make the bravest deed of her life, a deed that eventually cost her her freedom. 1947, Moscow. Gasping for breath, she ran up the stairs. Galina was terribly late. That day was a very important day in her life. 18-year-old Galina was entering the Theatre Institute. A moment later, she was on stage. On that day, Galia played Juliet before the members of the admissions department. She noticed teachers watching her with approval. 18-year-old Brezhneva wanted to weep with joy. Here it is, her hour of triumph. She's been preparing for this performance for months, learning the lines, rehearsing. And when the time had come, she quietly packed up and went from Dnipropetrovsk to Moscow. Galina wanted to surprise her parents, to return home with a student ticket in her pocket. But Galina did not know that the decision regarding her entrance to Moscow had long been made. Enough, thank you. Thank you very much. She looked into her teacher's eyes and couldn't hold back the tears. Why are these people looking away? The teachers, who were so friendly just a moment before, were brushing her aside. They said she lacked talent. That was all she heard. Galina's disappointment was limitless. Had all her efforts been in vain? Was she really useless? Galina felt exhausted, devastated. Her dream collapsed in one moment, and now she didn't know what to do. The corridor was filled with enthusiastic students. Nobody cared about the tearful, heartbroken girl helplessly sitting in the corner. Her fate was decided by one call from her father. Being an actress in the Soviet Union at that time wasn't considered very prestigious, and for an official's daughter, it was totally unacceptable. The first secretary of the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast Party Committee, Leonid Brezhnev, was successfully building his career. His biography had to be perfect, which is why an actress' daughter didn't fit in with this ideal. He wasn't straight with her. He didn't say, "My girl, you cannot do that. I have a status. I have this, I have that. You cannot be an actress. Do whatever you want, but not now." Maybe she would have accepted this. But to say, "Well, I do not want you to do that, but once you have decided, do it." And then to make a call to say, "She mustn't enter." This is the element of betrayal. When Galina discovered the truth, she became resentful. Without realizing it, Brezhnev had struck a second fatal blow to his beloved daughter. And this time, nothing would be able to fix it. 1945, Dnipropetrovsk. That night, 16-year-old Galina couldn't sleep. She had recently been going crazy. But of course, each day she was expecting her father to return from the front. The girl had been dreaming about this meeting for 4 long years of war. She wrote him letters, sent them to the front, and waited impatiently for his replies. Brezhnev was everything to Galina: a protector, an advisor, best friend, and role model. And there was his voice. Galina merrily ran to the kitchen door and suddenly froze. Why are her parents quarreling? Why is her mom crying? The girl listened. Brezhnev was nervously pacing the room. He was afraid to look his wife in the eye. "You're a traitor! I hate you!" He has another woman. They love each other and want to live together. Galina had to cover her mouth so as not to be heard. She wanted to run away, to hide, to forget everything. Could it be her daddy no longer loves her? What has she done wrong? Galina couldn't understand the reason for her father's strange behavior. That is why she was blaming herself during her parents' fight. In a few years, Galina would stop reproaching herself for her father's unfaithfulness, but she would never forget him hurting her. Brezhnev would not leave his family. As a result, his relationship with his daughter would be ruined forever. Children always take it as a slap in the face, as an insult, a betrayal. They always take sides with the hurt mother. This is all seen through the eyes of a girl who will never forget, "You have brought a different woman into my life, and look what you have done to us." This was the second psychological trauma that Galina had to endure. I believe it affected her entire life, as well as the way she died. Brezhnev's favorite daughter, an open and loving girl, would gradually begin to change. She would become silent, nervous, and quarrelsome. After failing her exams at the Theatre Institute, she avoided her father more and more, building up to a serious protest. At home in Dnipropetrovsk, Leonid Brezhnev won Galina a place at the Language and Literature Department of the local institute.
піде. А от вступати
She would go to
в
school, but refuse to join the komsomol.
Галина
Thus,
завдасть
Galina would strike the first blow to the reputation of her influential father.
взагалі життя
Her life became a constant struggle for independence.
люту боротьбу за незалежність.
Leonid Brezhnev even tried to influence her through some komsomol organizations. He thought that maybe it would have some effect, but it didn't. She believed he had no right to control her personal life. As a student, she loved to arrange parties for her fellow students. She would take expensive cognacs, wines and liqueurs from her father's cupboard. Galina often stayed up all night with her friends getting drunk. It made her feel independent and brave. She spent her whole life trying to undo her parents' failure. They had destroyed her childhood dreams. Galina and her parents would pay dearly. She ended up dedicating her entire life to this unrealistic theatrical career. But her father would always win. He would find her and bring her back home, causing a scandal. Her father never dared to raise his hand to her, and Galina knew that. She felt a hard blow to her back. Galina wearily sat down on the floor. She wanted to cry out. She was once again dragged into a hateful hospital ward that was more like a prison. Galina was kicking and screaming, but the nurses were much stronger. One injection of sedative, and Brezhneva fell into oblivion. Her body felt warm. She couldn't move. Yes, she didn't try to escape, but this does not mean she wouldn't try again. Suddenly, her consciousness returned. She had found a solution. Her daughter, her little Vikusia. She wouldn't leave her mother in the hospital like that. Vika loves her dearly. 1956. Moscow. Galina was furiously smashing china. She didn't care that her frightened little daughter Vika was watching. Let the girl know what a terrible father she has. Galina had started the fight. She saw what delights her husband, the famous USSR circus performer Yevgeny Milyev, took from looking at his colleague. Now, Galina was going crazy with jealousy. Vikusia was terrified. She had never seen her mother so irritated. The girl cried and grabbed her mother's dress, but Galina roughly pushed her away. She couldn't restrain herself, even in front of the child. They'd been married for 5 years. The circus performer Milyev became Galina Brezhneva's first and greatest love. Because of him, she took the desperate step of running away from home and secretly getting married. For the first time, Leonid Brezhnev had lost the battle with his daughter, but he accepted defeat and even welcomed the newlyweds into the family, and it decided the fate of their marriage forever. They got married, and you know, because of that, I had a conversation with Leonid Ilyich. He came over and told me. I came to their dacha at Zarechya. So he came to me and said, "Shame on you, you've disgraced me." He discovered that they'd married on the Voice of America. I said, "Leonid Ilyich, I didn't know myself." And he hadn't talked to the people in the wedding photo for a long time. They had gravely insulted him. He was very upset by the marriage and hadn't talked with Milya for a very long time. Another plate flew into the air, but someone's hand gripped Galina's wrist. Brezhnev could do nothing but interfere. He was protecting his son-in-law. Oddly enough, his acceptance of Milyev was her personal defeat, because when you take revenge on a man and challenge him, you expect resistance. Brezhnev did as a wise Oriental philosopher would do. He used psychological aikido. He gave in, showed no resistance, and thereby deprived her of her strength. He accepted him. However, Galina interpreted Brezhnev's actions differently. Her father justifies her unfaithful husband because he himself had a lot of mistresses. And now he's trying to control her life again. No, she couldn't let this happen. And now, to avenge her father, she was ready to cross the last line, to destroy her own family and leave her beloved husband. She loved Milyev all her life. And during the hard times, when I was with her, she was thinking only of her when she lived with Milyev. It was hard for her after living such a luxurious life. She was beautiful and wonderful. Everyone loved her. Everyone was singing her praises. They took everything. And then, alas, if there hadn't been long-standing opposition to Brezhnev, this fight could have ended in reconciliation. But Galina no longer thought about it. This situation couldn't have ended in a long-term relationship, since she acted only to spite her father. Of course, this is not the action of a grown woman. A family stays together when they plan for the future. She had no plans. Passion is not a plan. Passion lasts for a few months, and then it fades. Then the real relationship begins. Hair rollers, kids, plans. She would divorce her husband and leave her only daughter in the care of her grandparents. And little Vika would only see her mother a few times a year. The feelings she had for her only daughter were a sacrifice, which Galina made of her own free will. Then she stopped caring. She had her entire life ahead of her, and she wanted to enjoy it. There's a visitor for you. 1997, Moscow Oblast, Mental Hospital number 2. Galina happily jumped out of bed. Igor Kio. This person really meant a lot to her, and she really wanted to see him again. So many years had passed, but he was just as beautiful, tall and handsome. He still remembers her, and maybe even loves her. Galina looked into a large mirror. Brezhneva froze. Could she really have become this old, wrinkled woman? Surely not. So are you coming? Yes. 1961, Sochi. The newlyweds exchanged rings. Galia smiled at her husband. She felt completely happy. Brezhneva's new husband, the illusionist Igor Kio, was 14 years younger than Galina. Leonid Brezhnev couldn't approve of this relationship. She ran away with her lover to Sochi and secretly got married to him in the local registry office. Galina was celebrating her victory. She won this round against Brezhnev. Galina imagined how angry her father would be after learning about it all. Not for a minute did she regret what she had done. She enjoyed her new marriage, not knowing that it would last only 9 days. Watch next. special operation of the KGB to arrest Galina Brezhneva. Why was the daughter of the General Secretary sent to Moscow under a military escort? The bloody war with the General Secretary, scandalous dancing on a table and crazy affairs, which would be the talk of the entire country. How and why Galina provoked her all-powerful father. The end of the Brezhnev era. The death of the General Secretary and long-awaited freedom, which cost Brezhneva her life. (1961), Sochi. Galina was crying hysterically. She couldn't believe what she'd heard. She, a 32-year-old woman, the daughter of the influential member of the Politburo, was ordered to be taken under escort to Moscow as a prisoner. But Brezhneva couldn't do anything about it. It was on her father's orders. His victory was her bitter defeat.
Этот брак был расторгнут. Это уже вывело Брежнев.
Their marriage was dissolved. Brezhnev had run out of patience. Not only had he dissolved the marriage, but the KGB officers took Igor Kio and Galina Brezhneva's passports and tore out the marriage registration pages.
Галину Брежневу увезли.
Galina Brezhneva was taken away. They put her into a car and took her away to her father. But once again, they were not punished because it was not a crime. This irritated Brezhnev because it harmed his image as head of state and party. Under escort, Galina was taken out of the hotel room. She tried to resist, but the people in grey suits held her tightly. Galia helplessly looked at Kio. She didn't know that she wouldn't see him again in 20 years. Their passports would be replaced with new ones. Their marriage would be nullified. The illusionist Igor Kio wouldn't be allowed into Moscow for a long time. And Galina would become her father's prisoner. She would be forced to move into her father's apartment. In an attempt to block out the pain, Galina Brezhneva begins drinking. From then on, her life becomes a very public series of fights and scandals. During her alcoholism, she really burned the candle at both ends. She became promiscuous and found herself the butt of her friends' jokes. At one point, she even broke into a restaurant. She continued to rebel against her father, who led a decent lifestyle and was the righteous man of the Soviet Union. She would appear in the Kremlin half naked, in transparent dresses. She would get drunk at official banquets and start dancing. She would have many lovers and would spread incredible rumors about herself. Her free living certainly annoyed her father. He found her a job. She worked in Moscow in the press agency Novosti and at the archival department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. She was constantly watched over, but it was impossible to keep an eye on her all the time. She was always appearing in police reports or in some scandalous incident. At that time, her ex-husband Igor Kio returned to the capital. But Galina didn't want to meet with him. She no longer wanted to fight for his love. Galina accepted defeat and was ready to move on, not for her own sake, but for the sake of revenge, which would destroy her life. 1997, Moscow Oblast, Mental Hospital number 2. She looked at her ex-love and wept. Galina couldn't come out to Kio. She couldn't appear before him as a miserable old woman. Most of all, Brezhneva feared being pitted. Let Kio remember her as she was, a slender beauty whom he'd fallen madly in love with on tour, a fearless woman who knew how to fight, but not anymore. Galina was frantically rummaging through her things. Here it is, the dress in which she was taken to hospital. If shortened slightly, it will be very beautiful. There's always the next time. She will surely pull herself together and once again become that splendid Galina Brezhneva who attracted all the most attractive men. It awoke her excitement. She tried the dress on and buttoned up the large black buttons. He was nervously working on the stubborn buttonholes. Yuri Churbanov would not calm down. That day, he was planning to visit his ex-wife Galina Brezhneva in a sanatorium near Moscow. He was told that she had gone there to improve her health. Churbanov did not know that she was actually in a mental hospital. Galina, with her influence and connections, was his only chance to better his life after he was released from prison. And she will surely help him. After all, he was imprisoned because of her. After the death of General Secretary Brezhnev, his successor, Yuri Andropov, purged the Politburo, organizing show trials. In the heat of the moment, Leonid Brezhnev's son-in-law, Yuri Churbanov, was tried for bribery and abuse of authorities. Only 3 of over 100 charges were proved, but that was enough for a 12-year prison sentence. Churbanov served half the sentence. And now, he was going to visit his ex-wife and help restore his former status. Galina was shortening her dress with nail scissors. But one look into the mirror shattered all her illusions. Wrinkles, dark eyes, and pale lips. But that's fine. All she needs is a little makeup. Galina rushed to the mirror and carefully applied cosmetics. Yuri Churbanov glanced at himself in the mirror for the last time and was pleased with his appearance. Galina will be happy to help again. 1971, Moscow. Churbanov was standing in a crowd of onlookers. He was very embarrassed. Galina went on a crazy spree again. He couldn't get used to it, although her drunken brawls were common. But what he saw in the restaurant shocked even him. His drunk wife and a dubious-looking man were trying to get into the Writer's House restaurant through a back window. A crowd was cheering them on. He knew she was cheating on him, that she lived with some circus performers and traveled abroad a lot. But she didn't report back to Churbanov, the police general given to her according to her status. He sent his informants who reported back about Galina Brezhnev's tricks, but he couldn't raise his hand to her. Churbanov was filled with shame. Tomorrow, the whole of Moscow will be buzzing about it. He was imagining how his influential father-in-law would reproach him. In order to become Brezhnev's son-in-law, Cherbanov divorced and abandoned his children. But the General Secretary shut his eyes to it. Brezhnev liked Cherbanov, a man with a serious profession who was able to tame his wild-tempered wife. Cherbanov struggled to get Galina into his car. I hate you! I hate you both! You've ruined my entire life! Cherbanov couldn't understand. He thought she was drunk again. Cherbanov couldn't remember when Galina had changed from a gentle, loving wife into a nervous, hysterical bitch. Brezhnev's son-in-law didn't realize that he was the cause of her breakdown. 1970, Moscow. That evening, they were entertaining Cherbanov's colleagues. Galia was trying hard to be the perfect hostess. This was a new role for Galina. When she met Cherbanov, Brezhnev's wild life ended. There's something known as subconscious defense. I think this perfectly sums up Cherbanov. Why do you need protection from your own father? She behaved badly in order to spite her father. She found the protection she needed in her officer. After their marriage, she finally reconciled issues with her father. Scandals within the family stopped, and Galina happily took on the role of the good housewife. She called him every day to find out how he was. She wanted to call her husband to the kitchen when she heard the drunken laughter. As they say, one who marries like Cherbanov never needs a full purse. These words hurt Galina. But the worst thing was that they came from her husband. Luxurious apartment in downtown Moscow, furniture, dacha, and 2 cars. This was the dowry given to Cherbanov by his father-in-law after the wedding. But the main reward was yet to come, the rank of Lieutenant General and the post of First Deputy Minister of the Interior Ministry. Galina encouraged her husband's career advancement. But what she overheard was devastating. Friends told her that Cherbanov loved boasting about his easy life behind Galina's back. But Galina stubbornly refused to believe it. But now she realized that her husband didn't love her. All he wanted was the status given to him through the blood of the General Secretary's family. A cautionary tale, because the Lieutenant Colonel for Political Affairs immediately began to do well in his career. He soon became a colonel, then Major General. 6 or 7 years after the wedding, and he had already become a Colonel General, Deputy of Interior Minister. He received great power, but not over his wife. The higher his rank, the less Galina Brezhneva liked him. Galina wouldn't tell her husband anything. She would once again drown her humiliation and sorrow in enormous amounts of alcohol. And once again, she blamed her father for her broken life. Here was a man who loved Cherbanov, but barely noticed his own daughter. (1997), Moscow Oblast, Mental Hospital Number 2. Cherbanov was killing time in the waiting room, nervously crumpling a bouquet of flowers in his hands. Why is Galina in a mental hospital? How will she meet him? What if she refuses to help? After all, she was so unpredictable. He waited for over an hour, but she still didn't appear. He gently opened the door and looked into the ward. In an empty room, a fat woman was twisting in front of the mirror. She wore terrible makeup and a revealingly short dress. She looked like a scarecrow. But even so, Cherbanov recognized her. It was Galina Brezhneva. Once the most beautiful woman in the USSR. Final detail, and Galia was ready to go. Now she was not ashamed to appear before her visitor. She was happy. Cherbanov must have come to apologize. He still loves her and wants to take her home. Galina opened the door. The waiting room was empty. She looked around, searching for her husband. How could she have been so cruelly deceived? Maybe Cherbanov was waiting for her in the street. Maybe he's late. Her eyes rested on a bouquet of wine-red roses. He always used to give her wine-red roses. No, not again. She will not survive another lie. She wanted to scream out of loneliness and because of a broken heart. She felt abandoned, useless, but couldn't bring herself to show her true feelings. She couldn't stop singing. In a large apartment in downtown Moscow, Galina Brezhneva was partying hard. She was drinking vodka straight from the bottle and dancing provocatively on the table. She pulled up her skirt, revealing her legs. She didn't care that there were strangers there, and that the next day, her scandalous photos would appear in the Western press. It was a miserable, drunken end, you know? Everyone abandoned her. Nobody wanted to see her. When a foreign film company came to meet her, she welcomed them into Brezhnev's apartment and began to dance drunkenly on the table. By now, she was fat and unattractive. The foreign film company took pictures of her. She wanted to cry, but instead was singing a monotonous song. She wanted to be alone, but had filled her house with unfamiliar people. An hour before, Leonid Brezhnev suffered a heart attack. The doctor's prognosis was not good. The General Secretary was slowly dying. 1982, Moscow. She was sitting on the floor of her apartment and could not believe what had happened. Was her father really gone? She had seen the coffin, the body, and the lavish funeral procession with her own eyes. And now, Galina felt absolutely devastated. The system is collapsing, and here's a very interesting phenomenon. She loses the main person whom she's resisted her whole life. It would seem, well, here you go. You're miserable, your husband is in prison, your father has died, you have no support. It's a very interesting phenomenon when you have no one left to fight with. Your life becomes meaningless. She couldn't figure out what she wanted. Her entire life was one big confrontation with this person. She loved and hated him, and now he was gone. And for the first time, Galina didn't know what to do. Her father's death, of course, was shocking. She changed from an energetic, beautiful woman into a sad loser. There was no one left to show off to. Her scandalous behavior didn't surprise anyone and was no longer interesting. Nobody lent her a hand, you know, so the calls stopped, everything stopped. They've forgotten that there was Leonid Brezhnev, that he was the general secretary. She had to live on, but Galina didn't know how. She didn't know anything but alcohol and scandal. It got to the point where she sold all her valuables before ending up in a mental hospital. Brezhneva's daughter, Victoria, would never visit her mother in the asylum, and all the letters written to her by Galina were placed in a drawer unread. She would forget about her mother, just as her mother had done to her. I don't think she understood her mother's life. She was deeply unhappy and began blaming her father for everything. She too was deeply dysfunctional and had a problem with intimacy. Why didn't she come to the asylum? Because she has no mother. 1997. Moscow Oblast. Mental Hospital number 2. Galina was staring at a white figure leaning over her bed. A smile lit up her face. Has someone come for her? The stranger's features became more clear. Galina recognized her doctor. Galina Leonidovna, we've made the tests. You have cirrhosis. You have only 2 months left to live. The doctor was long looking at the patient. The silence was broken by a loud, merry laugh. Galina was as happy as a child. Cirrhosis, a couple of months. What other lies can these doctors tell her? Soon she will go. Only her friends were informed. The doctors were wrong. Brezhneva only had a couple of weeks to live, during which she wrote letters to her numerous friends. To those for whom she had done so much. Some offered to buy her friends' cars and flats, but no one replied. Galina Brezhneva outlived her father by 16 long years. These were the years of loneliness and collapse. the collapse of the woman who had everything: family, love, power, and money. For the sake of revenge, she sacrificed it all. The splendid Kremlin princess was dying in a mental hospital alone. She kept on hoping that her friends would rescue her from this awful place. She deteriorated rapidly, but didn't regret a thing.